Welcome to the Bold Podcast. I'm Todd Birch, keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and mental fitness coach. I'm here to help you unlock your leadership potential and ignite your personal growth. On the Bold, my guests and I will dive into inspiring stories of transformation, showing how small mindset shifts can lead to life-changing benefits. We'll explore strategies for overcoming challenges, building high-performance habits, and leading with confidence. If you're ready to embrace a growth mindset and unlock your full potential, then let's ignite your spark today. Today on the Bold Podcast, I'm joined by Eric Collett, nationally recognized speaker, educator, and brain health expert. Eric is the principal and CEO of A Mind for All Seasons, where he helps people of all ages optimize brain health and reimagine what's possible in dementia care and beyond. He's not only a leader in healthcare innovation, but he's also a lifelong learner who blends science, creativity, and compassion to inspire growth. Listeners, get ready for an enlightening conversation. Eric, welcome to the Bold Podcast, my friend.
Oh, thanks, Todd. It's awesome to be with you.
Oh my gosh. So I really enjoyed our conversation several months ago. You and I have a lot in common, except for music. You are an accomplished musician. I am not. I can dance, but I can't play. But aside from that, you and I have a lot in common. So let's
if you've ever seen me dance, you will know that I need to stick to playing the music. You stick to the dancing, and we got it covered.
we might have a dynamic duo there, right? That's great. So you've been doing this for a long time. Brain health expert. How does one get to that point? And how did you find yourself in this field?
Oh, gosh. I think I'm probably like a lot of entrepreneurs who look back and say, man, I couldn't have predicted the path.
Right.
I mean, the short story is I stumbled into a career in assisted living and memory care, which reignited an interest in Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative diseases that I'd had since high school. So I started going to more conferences and reading more books. And then over 9 years ago, I started A Mind for All Seasons. And we've gone through 100 different pivots as we've learned and tried to leverage current science. But when I think about the way that you describe me as a brain health expert, and I think, well, what does that actually mean? I think an expert fundamentally is just someone who sees through a more refined lens or who can see things that others don't. So maybe a good example of that is an experience that I had a few years ago when I was in the line at the grocery store. And it was like super average Friday night. My wife and I had done some shopping. We were just waiting in line. And this guy that was ahead of us just started being really rude to the checker for no apparently good reason. And earlier in my life, I would have thought, man, what a jerk. Who treats people that way? That's just so uncalled for. But instead, I found myself thinking, wow, I wonder what's caused some inflammation in this guy's frontal lobe, because there's no emotional restraint. There's no reasoning. There's no judgment going on. Clearly, there's a problem. And it was in that moment that I stepped back and I thought, man, I see the world so differently than I used to, because I'm viewing it through that lens of brain health and how it's affecting our behavior from day to day. And that was kind of a cool moment of realization that something had changed from the time I was younger, though I can't pinpoint exactly when that shift occurred.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I absolutely love that. And I can totally relate from my experience in positive intelligence, going through the mental fitness program. And I'm trying to picture myself in that same story. And I do similar things where I'll look at somebody that past me would have been the same thing. And I probably would have said something, because that's just how I grew up. That's how my mom was. We always, put our foot in our mouths. But going through positive intelligence and really being able to pause instead of react, and then really come at it with empathy and say, I'm going to make the assumption that everybody is struggling with something. I don't know what it is. It might be big, might be small, but they're struggling with something. So when you lead with empathy and you change your lens, and that's in fact what you did, right? You changed your mindset lens. You can look at life in a whole different way. And it's beautiful when you live like that, right? It's so positive.
Yeah. It's really freeing, actually. It's not
Yeah.
only positive, but I think it's been freeing for me to see the world that way because I've come to recognize that behavior is communication, uh, and that's something that you learn in the communication field. I actually have a degree in communication, but behavior is also an outward manifestation of an internal state. And when you see people's emotional reactions to the world change and shift as things change with their health, I think that impacts the way that we see people and our ability to interact differently. I think, Todd, that most of us go through life interacting on the basis of what we think is deserved. Oh, what does this
Mm.
other person deserve? It's an entirely different thing to ask the question, what would be helpful here? It's not about what's deserved. And when I figured that out as a parent, it changed my parenting. When I figured that out as a business leader, it changed the way that I strive to lead my team. So these little shifts are actually big hinges
Mm.
that, or, well, I guess you could say they're small hinges that swing big doors, to follow
Yes.
that cliche.
Wow. Yeah. I love that. So let's talk a bit. So what is brain health? What is cognitive health?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think most people go through life not really thinking about the health of their brain and how it's affecting things. But obviously, the brain's the control tower for everything from reasoning and planning and judgment to personality to our ability to work with numbers and fine motor skills and gross motor skills. And when the brain is healthy, it's able to perform all those functions. But when it's not healthy, you get outward symptoms. The problem is, I don't think that most people see their symptoms as a brain health problem.
Mm.
And it starts with the fact that we talk about healthcare and the mental health care system, as if you can cut it off at the neck, as if there's two totally different things. And somehow we also think that mental health problems are somehow different than if you have a traumatic brain injury or if you have Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease. I think all of these things are on a spectrum, and it all has to do with whether your brain is functioning well or whether it's functioning poorly. And if it's functioning poorly, then those areas that are not working well are going to fail to perform their function. You're going to get outward signs. So, for example, I've been blessed to work with a number of retired NFL athletes. And I mean, these are Super Bowl winning athletes, some of them. And they've spent many seasons in the NFL. And when they get out, very often they have symptoms like they go from zero to fighting mad, bam, at the
Mm.
drop of a hat. They can't think very well. They can't process. They can't sequence tasks. Sometimes their memory's impaired. Well, a lot of those things are the outward sign that the front part of their brain is not making good energy. They've got chronic inflammation in the frontal lobe, and it shows up as emotional lability. They go from zero to fighting mad at the drop of a hat, and it terrifies them. Or they become depressed and suicidal because they're emotionally dysregulated.
Mm.
I have watched those same people, when we take the steps to calm that inflammatory response and to bring their frontal lobe fully back online and producing good energy again, become very different people. The thing I love is when their wives come and say, "Thank you so much. I feel like I got my husband back."
Mm.
That's just amazingly gratifying. But it also changes someone in my position, because when you're watching people shift and improve and honestly behave differently because their hardware is functioning differently, it shifts the perspective that a person has.
Yeah. Yeah. That's got to be incredibly rewarding, the role that you're in, to be able to have somebody come to you with a challenge and be able to guide them through a process and see them come out in a better form than they were when they first met you, and in some ways changing their life, all their relationships, everybody that they serve. um, I know, and I think I mentioned this to you, but my mother has been diagnosed with early Alzheimer's. So I've been promoted to caregiver. So I'm at that stage in life where I'm now learning about dementia, Alzheimer's, and how this, affects the brain. And fortunately for me, I have some experience with it. But it's not easy, right? My mom is a generally negative person, so that makes it incredibly difficult. And she's 78 years old. So and I'm sure you experience this, they're set in their ways, right? So I have all this positive intelligence, mental fitness work that I can provide her and guide her, but she doesn't want to hear it from me, maybe from an expert like yourself. But it's challenging, to watch her, even in this early stage. She'll tell me something, and then 5 minutes later, she'll ask me the same question. Now she knows who I am, and she still has some long term memory, but the beginning of this process is there, and it's very frustrating for her. And somebody who's already kind of has a negative mindset, it's a challenge. So I can relate, and it'll be interesting as we go along through this process. But I guess where I was leading with it, Eric, is it all comes down to really the commitment to take action, right? It's all about change. And we know change is scary, especially as somebody gets to that age of 70, 80 years old and they're set in their ways, right? Mental health wasn't a thing, brain science, neuroscience, neuroplasticity, these weren't things that we were talking about. And so they were just used to their comfort zone and hitting that default button. How do when they come to you, they've already said, hey, I need help. But what I'm really, really interested in is how do we get people, right? More people to come to you, to make that choice to say, I think there's something else going on here. And I'm okay. I'm willing to take some action to try to understand it and then potentially make it better.
Yeah.
A lot to unpack. Sorry, but
No, that's great. It's a good question, Todd. And it's one that I ask myself every day, because I honestly believe that millions of people desperately need the kind of work that my team and I do.
uh
And I'll give you two different answers, because there's kind of two different points that we can talk about. There are people like your mom who are already showing symptoms of horrible neurodegeneration. One of the interesting things about a disease like Alzheimer's is we know that the pathology is there. The tangles and plaques that show up in the Alzheimer's brain, they are starting to build up 20 or more years before the first symptoms even show up. And most people miss the first symptoms because we've confused in our world what is common with being normal. There's a huge difference between common and normal. Yes, it's common that people get progressively more and more forgetful and they lose cognitive functioning, but that is not normal aging. That's evidence of disease. But when 1 in 3 seniors is dying with Alzheimer's or another type of dementia, it's super common, and it's easy to confuse that as, oh, that's just what happens as you get older. No, that's not true. But most people think, oh, I had another brain fart, or I had a senior moment. They even joke about it. And I'm not saying that there aren't moments where we experience some forgetfulness. There are certain things that happen to all of us that are totally normal. But when things are getting progressively worse, that's a symptom. And most people miss that. So then they live for a few more years and things get bad enough that everyone around them is recognizing something's off. So part of your question is, well, how do we approach those people? So let me answer that first, and then I'll go upstream a little bit, which I think is even more impactful. When someone's already struggling, the biggest thing that I see in 25 years of working with people with these types of diseases that can produce positive momentum is to help people understand that there's something that they can do. Most people have grown up believing that if you get a disease like Alzheimer's, you're hosed. Most people still think that it's a genetic issue, and if you have those genes, there's not a darn thing that you can do about it. You're just going to go down in flames. So you might as well ignore the fact and just make the most of life while you can. And we know so much more than that. We know that there's a lot that we can do to improve the brain. And the work that my team and I do really began 9.5 years ago with leveraging current research to specifically help Alzheimer's patients to improve. And as we help them improve measurably, like we had an early guy named Marv that he'd gone to 3 different neurologists, and they had all diagnosed him with Alzheimer's disease and said, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do for you. And he shifted from being happy and gregarious to just being really rude and abrasive. And things got so hard for his wife that their adult children said, "Mom, you can't do this anymore. You have to place Dad in someone else's care."
Mm.
So she moved him into a community where we were piloting the enhanced protocol, which is kind of the name for the process that we use. And we did an extensive panel of blood work. We looked at nutrients and hormones and inflammatory markers and metabolic factors, etc. We found a lot of things that no one had ever paid attention to, and we set about fixing those things. And at baseline, he scored 15 out of 30 on a standard cognitive assessment. And 6 months later, he scored 30 out of 30. And no, he wasn't cured. He was just so much more functional that he didn't warrant a dementia diagnosis. He was able to do a lot more for himself, and he actually moved back home. And when we started having those kinds of results, that led to family members saying, "Wow, you just helped this person show massive improvement. What could you do for my brain?" And they would say things like, "Oh, I've been in a car accident a couple of years ago. I've never been the same since. I can't sleep. I can't focus and concentrate to save my life. But if you can help someone with dementia have measurable improvement, what could you do for my brain?" And that opened up a whole different world of possibilities, and I started seeing things differently. So again, if someone already has symptoms, helping them know that they're not stuck, that there is something that they can do. There's not a cure for Alzheimer's disease, but there's a lot that we can do to live better with it and to maintain a higher level of independence. I think that gives people hope. And when people have hope, there's an openness to try. So before I move upstream, I'm curious if there's anything that you have further questions about regarding that sort of downstream situation that your mom is in and how to have that conversation.
No, I love that. And I think that's the key word is hope, and it's inspiration, right? We can lead a horse to water, but we can't make the horse drink the water. So all we can do is inspire, motivate, and present hope.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all we can do. They have to make that choice still. Right?
Yeah.
So
I think what we're talking about really, Todd, is a leadership question. And as much as I love giving keynote speeches about brain health and how to optimize brain health, I've done a lot of workshops on leadership as well. And probably the most important lesson I've ever learned about leadership really applies to this situation with your mom and others like it. I think most people ask the question, how do I get her to do what she needs to do? And we ask that same kind of question in business all the time. How do I get my people to do the things that I need them to do for us to be successful? And I've learned that that is the wrong question, or at least it's not as effective as a different question that we could ask. It's, I think, much more effective to consider how could we create the conditions under which this person would be more likely to choose to do what would help her? Or how do we create the conditions where my employees are more likely to choose the things that will help us succeed as a team? That's a very different question, but it's rooted in the fact that humans hate to be told what to do. And that doesn't go away. But we like to know that we're choosing to do something. And there are a lot of ways that we can create conditions that influence the likelihood that someone's going to make it a positive choice.
yes, I couldn't agree more. And I think it really comes down to creating a growth-oriented culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. People want to win. Nobody got up this morning and looked in the mirror and said, "Hey, you, let's get out there and wreck our lives."
Right.
We're all trying. We want to show up and be successful. And yet we sometimes treat each other as if we're purposely just trying to blow life up and make problems for other people. And that's just not the case. Everybody's trying.
Yeah, I truly believe that. Yeah.
So you talked earlier as well, or you asked kind of the questions that led me to say, well, there's sort of the downstream and then there's an upstream situation. And as we worked with guys like Marv down in Arizona, who improved so significantly, and we started having younger people coming and saying, well, what could you do for my brain? I realized there was a huge opportunity because, as I mentioned earlier, diseases like Alzheimer's start decades before the symptoms show up. And although we can't cure Alzheimer's, it's largely preventable. Most of the top experts in the world in the Alzheimer's space now recognize we could be preventing a lot of cases of Alzheimer's disease. But people have to do the right things. And there are so many forces in the world saying you can't get humans to be proactive, especially Americans. They just won't do it. They want to abuse their bodies for years and then hope that there's a magic pill. And so we have to come up with medications to treat the symptoms of all these problems because people are weak-willed. And I think that's absolutely bogus. I think the way that you help people do things earlier in life is you connect their behavior with outcomes that they want earlier in life. I work with a lot of business leaders, Todd, and business leaders recognize my brain is my tool in the knowledge economy, and they want their tool to be sharp. They don't want to suffer with brain fog. They want to be able to get home at the end of the day and get on the floor and play with their kids or have a conversation with their spouse and have the energy to really focus and concentrate and do that. They want to be able to go out and do their hobbies when they're done with work. And the list goes on. But when you help people understand that the very things that will allow you to have all of that, to have really good energy to do the things that you want to do, are exactly the same things that you need to do to prevent horrific disease downstream, then you get the best of both worlds. You give someone what they want now, and you give them a tremendous benefit later. I think that's huge for people. They just need to see it and understand it.
Yes, I agree. It's all in the framing, right? It's
absolutely.
It's how you frame it and present it. Well, do we want to go upstream, or do we want to talk a little bit about what are some of the things you can do? I love that you talked about the leadership aspect, because we do have a lot of leaders and entrepreneurs on the show. And let's be honest, those folks, they're strapped, right? They're stretched already. So they're probably, if not already burned out, approaching burnouts, likely stressed. You and I are both entrepreneurs. We've been down that road. It's a choice we make, right? But we can also, I've learned, but it took me a long time to really take a step back and say, I need to focus on me first. I cannot serve my team, my family, everybody in the community until I take care of myself. So as leaders, we want certain things, like you said. We want to be sharp. We want to be crisp. We want to be able to make great decisions. We want to be able to problem solve, be creative, stay sharp. But how do we do that, Eric? Are there some simple things that we can do to start to just move the needle? Because I think when we talk about change, right, and we can instill motivation, inspire, hope, but there's still that fear, right? That saboteur voice that's all fear-based, that's in our head telling us, no, it's going to be uncomfortable. You might fail. You don't have the right tools. Don't try something new. Run away. Survival brain. But when we can get out of that and we can embrace discomfort and kind of lean into growth, we can start to just take small shifts, right? So we're not trying to move the mountain. We're just trying to get 1% better every day. And that's how I approach it in my keynotes and in my coaching, is just, let's try one thing. So what's one thing, Eric, or a couple of just smaller shifts that are easy, that we can try to do now to build that momentum and start to tack on other things as we go?
Yeah. It's a great question. And when I wrestle with that question a little bit, Todd, I think the place for most people to start is with their mindset. And honestly, I think a lot of people are confusing a software, or they're confusing a hardware problem for a software problem. So years ago, I was working with a business executive out of Atlanta. And as we were working together, at the outset, he said, I really need to get more done in the day. I'm not accomplishing as much as I'd like to because I'm just distracted. And my thoughts just bounce all over the place like ping pong balls. And we kind of unpacked some of his worries and concerns. And I was able to help connect those to brain health problems. But as he did the work and as he moved forward and he started to make improvements, his processing speed improved by 30% on an objective cognitive test. So we use a cognitive test that was developed by Stanford researchers about 20 years ago, and it's been administered over 20 million times. So it's a really good academically verified test that's like a fine-tuned comb to look at every aspect of your brain functioning. And so this guy's processing speed objectively went up 30%. And as that happened, and as we were reviewing that, and I said, well, what are you noticing in your life? What's coming up for you? He said, I honestly thought that I needed to read David Allen's great book on productivity another time, or I needed to go to another workshop, or I needed to get a coach to teach me how to just be more organized and get more stuff done. And he said, I was all wrong about that. I just had a problem with my processing speed. My brain was not functioning well. And now that my brain is functioning well, I'm just naturally getting a ton more done in the day. It's like double my previous output. And then he said the key thing. He said, Eric, it's like my brain is the hardware. And I was so worried trying to load new software on and read and learn and go to all these things that I wasn't paying attention to the fact that it's a hardware problem. And I thought, man, that's brilliant, because everyone knows what happens if you go get a new piece of software and you load it onto crummy old hardware. My wife has this old iPad that you can't even upgrade anymore. And I think a lot of people are walking around with brains that are kind of like that old iPad, and it's time to pay more attention to the hardware. So I think the first simple step is to just recognize the difference between hardware and software and start thinking about things in terms of brain health, and then begin to get educated. And as we apply the things that we're learning, little by little, we start really getting better results as our brain health improves.
Yeah, I love that. Something I wanted to talk about a little bit, Eric, and I didn't send this to you when we were initially talking, but is discomfort. I think a lot of us stay away from discomfort for fear, afraid of trying something new. We don't really even have any discomfort in our lives because there's the no pain society, right? You said it. There's a pill for everything. I want the magic pill, and I'm going to be better tomorrow. I don't want to invest the time, put the effort in, do the work. So we don't experience discomfort, and we're not used to discomfort. We even try to regulate our heating and cooling, right? So we don't even experience, and that's why cold plunging is so popular, so that we can get that discomfort back into our lives that we were so accustomed to when we were out running through the plains trying to kill animals. So I think we need to figure out how to entice people to just embrace a little bit of discomfort. Because once we start to do that, we can see that it's really not that bad, right? And it's so good for our brain, right? I'm just reading, I picked up this little book here. It's just I don't know if you've ever seen this little guy from a little gift shop, $10 book. It's all about neurobic exercises. But I love it. It's a great way to break up your day and to change your patterns. So the one thing they talk about is that we are in such a routine, and I talk a lot about how important habits are and building habits, but it was really interesting when I read this, and he was talking about how routine we are, that we don't break out of our patterns. So we're not trying anything new. So we're not challenging our brain. Therefore, that circling back to that discomfort piece. And I know you mentioned it once, and I wanted to bring it up, where I had a little injury in July with my son, with my elbow, and where we're very active. We play a lot of sports together. It's all we do. It's very competitive. So I couldn't do that anymore. Like, I was really hurt, my right arm. And so we still played some activities like badminton, but we switched to our opposite hand. And it was really interesting because it forced me to do something that I wasn't comfortable doing. So a lot of discomfort, but my son joined in and he said, I'll play. He's left-handed. He played with his right, and we played. And at the end of the trip, and, we were dropping him off at the airport, I said, we always have this game, like, what was your favorite moment, of the trip together? And he said, I think it was playing badminton with my opposite hand. I was like, you got to be kidding me. We love growth. We really do like discomfort, Eric, but we stay away from it. We stay away. So I don't know. I was going down I'm sorry. I'm so excited and all these things I want to talk about with you. I hope some of that made sense. That at the epicenter, at the core was discomforts, and we all need to embrace some discomfort. So I don't know what
I think that's a powerful concept, but I want to see if I can put a finer point on it as far as,
please,
what can our audience who's listening to this actually do? Because some people aren't going to go out and play badminton with their non-dominant hand. But there is a very important principle that you're describing. And it's the principle of what stimulates the brain to make new connections. And it's not it's not about doing crossword puzzles. If you do that, you're going to get better crossword puzzles, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's not Sudoku, because you're just going to get better at Sudoku. It's about presenting the brain with new experiences. And there are a lot of effective ways to do that. If you do anything with your non-dominant hand, it could be eating with your non-dominant hand or brushing your teeth with your non-dominant hand. That forces your brain to make new connections. And if you want to have a better brain, that's one of the things that has to happen. You've got to stimulate new synapses. If you are traveling and you don't use a GPS, well, that's going to force some new connections. If you're learning a new language, if you're learning an instrument, that's forcing new connections. So anything that is new for the brain, yes, there's some discomfort, but it's really good for us. As you talked about discomfort, Todd, you reminded me of a quote from one of my best friends, Jonathan Roach, who is he's an executive and elite athlete mindset coach. Like 4 of his coaching clients were in the top 10 of the recent Masters tournament. That's the level that Jonathan's coaching at. Lots of NFL, PGA, NBA, Major League Baseball athletes. And Jonathan and I were talking years ago when he first said, hey, Eric, if you get comfortable being uncomfortable, you become unstoppable. I love that concept. And a lot of what you were talking about when you sort of hinted at creating levels of discomfort like cold plunging really gets to a principle that I think people need to understand. If they want to have a better brain, they need to understand the principle of hormesis or hormetic stressors. Hormesis is a stress on the body that it causes some mild discomfort, but it stimulates the body to become more resilient. So the easy thing that people can relate to is weight training. You're tearing down muscle. It's uncomfortable. I don't know that many people who love the feel of the burn that they get as lactic acid is building up in the muscles and we're tearing down muscle. But it stimulates the body to build back stronger. So what does that have to do with brain health? Well, when our energy level drops, then we get symptoms. And in the brain, you have a huge immune system in the brain. By volume, roughly 50% of the cells in the brain are not neurons, they're immune cells. And when the immune system turns on, energy production drops. So Todd, think about the last time that you got sick with some nasty virus. Probably one of the earliest symptoms that you noticed was crushing fatigue. If you come down with something really bad, you feel like you're coming down with it and you go climb back in bed and you can sleep 20 hours a day and still feel exhausted. And that is because when the immune system cranks up, our energy production drops. Well, that can happen throughout the entire body, or it can happen in a localized area like the brain. So when you have a mental health problem, or when your brain is just feeling foggy, in a lot of ways what's going on is the immune system is revved up to some degree. You have an inflammatory response, and you have this low energy. So anything that we can do that increases energy production and calms inflammation is going to be helpful for the brain. That's why there's so many options that help to make a difference. Brain health is never about one thing. It's always about many, many different factors. So, for example, when it comes to stressors, if you have cold exposure, that stimulates your body to make more and bigger mitochondria. the energy producers of the cells. And there's a whole lot of other good physiology that occurs alongside that. Well, if you're producing more and bigger mitochondria, you have greater energy output. And that means that your brain's also likely to function better as a result of it. The same thing happens with heat exposure. The same thing happens when we're fasting and we're having that hormetic stress on the body of giving it a reason to become more resilient. If you're doing breath work and you're doing breath holding exercises, hypoxic breathing exercises, we call it, well, that's also stimulating the body to make more and bigger mitochondria. So a lot of what we have are, I like Dr. Ben Bickman's term for it, the plagues of prosperity. We have such a comfortable world where the body isn't stressed, and it's killing us. We need stress to do better. We need the right amount of stress. So yeah, people can look for opportunities to be a little bit uncomfortable. If people want to make their brains better, there's kind of two broad categories. And I'll describe them, and we can talk about any of the things there that you want to talk about, Todd. But on the one hand, they're lifestyle factors, and that's kind of what we've been talking about. And there's a short list of things that could really be areas that people could focus on. And then there's biomarkers. There's things that are actually measurable in a blood test or some other test, things that are objective, that if we measure them, we can intercede if there's a problem of some sort. So when we're aware of those two broad categories and how they affect energy production at the cellular level, that's when we start to get better results. That's when we start to figure out some of our own brain health problems.
We'll be right back after this short message. Hey, it's Todd again. Did you know that mental fitness is the secret weapon for transformational leadership? Your mind may be sabotaging you, leading you down a path of stress and negativity, but it doesn't have to be this way. If you're ready to unlock the resilience to empower yourself and the team you lead, listen up. Through the Positive Intelligence Program, PQ for short, I help leaders build mental strength, manage stress, and increase emotional intelligence. Imagine reducing burnout, improving your relationships, and increasing performance, all backed by neuroscience. Look, I'm living proof of its power, having rewired my brain after building my mental fitness with PQ over the last 5 years. Are you ready to build yours? Visit toddbirch.com for more information, and let's get a free consultation scheduled today. Now back to the show. Eric, is there anything that you do? What does your routine look like? As somebody who is, quote unquote, brain health expert, what does a day in the life of Eric Collett look like?
Yeah, I absolutely practice what I preach. I live and die by this stuff. So the most important thing that I have done that I could share with people is I do blood work. Not as often as I used to, because I don't have to do it as often. But many years ago, when we started going down this pathway of helping people, I did an extensive panel of blood work to look at nutrients and hormones and inflammatory markers and genetics and metabolic markers to understand the things that were affecting my performance day to day and that also affected my long-term risk. And I found certain things that influence how I eat. I found certain things that influence what I supplement. And I continue to adjust that over time. I'm also really aware of lifestyle factors. So here's a list of things to pay attention to. Brain training, we already kind of talked about. Having new cognitive experiences. Exercise is a big factor. And I not only work hard to get out and have a good workout every day, kind of cardiovascular workout 3 times a week and weight training 3 times a week, but I also take regular exercise snacks throughout the day. If you get up and you exercise for 30 to 60 minutes and then you sit at a desk all day long, that's called being an active couch potato. And it's almost as damaging to us as not doing any sort of exercise. Every hour to hour and a half, I get up and I move. I've got an exercise bike in my office and I might get on it and crank hard for 3 minutes. I might do lunges around the office for a few minutes. I do something to get my heart rate up, something to work my muscles. I might do push-ups. There's tons of possibilities. And you don't even have to have equipment to do anything like that. So I really prioritize that. That keeps me going. Um, eh, Beyond brain training and exercise, I'm really intentional about how I eat. And I try to leverage principles. I don't fall into the fads. There are lots of dietary fads. There's lots of dietary tribalism. You and I could talk about diet and principles that really work for hours. But I'll just say that I eat based on principles. I ask myself, what do I want this fuel to do? How am I trying to run the engine right now? And I shift what I'm eating based on my goals at the time. If I'm trying to build muscle, I'm eating differently than if I'm doing brain work. So lots that we could say about that, but I'm really intentional about diet. I'm thoughtful about dental health. Most people don't realize how much dental health affects their brain health. A large number of people who die with Alzheimer's and donate their brains to science are found to have P. gingivalis bacteria living in the brain. And I mentioned earlier, if your immune system flares up, your energy production drops. Well, if you have P. gingivalis bacteria living in your brain and your brain's immune system is chronically fired up, guess what? You're going to have problems persistently. It's going to wreck you. Not to mention the risk of heart disease and all sorts of other things that are driven by that bacteria. So I'm really thoughtful about how I take care of my teeth. Sleep is huge. Sleep is when the glymphatic system runs. That's the clean cycle of the brain. That's literally when your brain is taking out garbage. So I really prioritize getting 7 to 8 hours of really good, deep, restful sleep. I work hard to go to bed at the same time and to get up at the same time. And, I've got kids that are 16 to 24 years old. And so sometimes it's tricky. Sometimes things come up. But I don't let the desire for perfection be the enemy of a solid effort. And we work to be consistent. I also am intentional about stress management. And I'm aware of the fact that I can't change some of the stressors that come into my life, but I always have control over the counterbalances. And I think a lot of people miss that. When stress goes up, we're not a victim. If your stress is going up, you can intentionally counterbalance. And what that looks like for me is more time meditating and praying, more time going out for walks, more time doing a little extra exercise, more time playing instruments because that's de-stressing for me. And we can all intentionally counterbalance if we're just aware of it and thinking about it. So that's kind of the list of things that I work into my day. I'm fairly routine as far as my schedule, but I'm also not rigid about it. I'm not as rigid as I used to be. I try to balance rigidity and flexibility and have elements of both in my life. And that's just part of what helps me feel balanced.
Yeah, I love all of those. I am a big advocate of everything that you're doing. I do a very similar routine. And it's funny we talk about routine because that was the one thing that I read. I was like, wow, that's interesting because I am a big proponent of habits and I am a habitual person to the nth degree and to some ways in a bad way. I had substance abuse issues when I was a teenager. And so I need to be careful, but it's also been, more of a positive, right? Just understanding and how to leverage that trait that I have. But I track everything and I've done it for years. And I have this crazy spreadsheet and this process and I've showed it to people and they say, oh my gosh, that is insane that you do that. But it keeps me focused and keeps me aligned to everything that is important to me, which like you, stress, eating, taking care of myself, sleeping. I bought the Aura Ring during COVID. I went from 5 hours of sleep to 7.5 hours of sleep in 3 years. Again, that was being intentional. I knew how important sleep was and I wanted to focus it, but I needed an accountability partner. And this was him. And I lost my wedding ring. So it was a no brainer. But there's a number of things that we can do, but for me, I needed to be careful about the ritual. So like you, I love how you said sticking to it, but being flexible. So I have a wife who's very flexible and not very structured like I am. So I've leaned on her and kind of her traits to allow me just to kind of be a little bit more laissez-faire and go with the flow a little bit. But after reading this and understanding that you got to be careful about getting too routine. Like take a different route to work, right? We can get in that, I call it Groundhog Day. And that's essentially the comfort zone. That's the killer, right? That is the comfort zone, the fixed mindset. Then we're on our path to slowly dying. And that's that default button. Same thing. Get up, make breakfast, kids to school, go to work, come home, wash the dishes, take the dog out, watch Jeopardy, say a prayer, and go to bed. And then let's get back up and do the same thing. But what if you took a different path to work? What if you tried a different station or a different podcast or did something with your opposite hand, right? But just not being so rigid. So I don't know. I just wanted to focus on that because I think it is important for some of us who are really routine people. And that's what we want. We want to get it. We talk about atomic habits. It's all about getting into, we want these to be our new default, right? We want to get rid of the bad habits, create the new ones so they are easy, so we don't have to think about them. But that can also be a detriment. We need to be careful. So I think that's an important piece that I learned recently that I was not aware of.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point. And Todd, it really speaks to one of the most important lessons I've learned in my entire life. If I could go back and talk to my younger self, I would teach this principle. And it's something that I share with a lot of my clients as I'm coaching them, because we live in a very polarized world, increasingly so. And I mean, as well as anybody that it's gotten ugly out there. There's a lot of hatred and unkindness. And I think a lot of that polarization is also at the core of this discussion that we're having. I know they seem disconnected, but I think they're actually deeply connected when we learn how to see it. So one of the most important things that I've learned in my life is that if you prove contraries, that's where you find truth. And a contrary, if you go back to the 1800s and earlier, did not always mean an opposite. Sometimes it meant things that were both equally true, but they tugged against each other. So, for example, consider justice and mercy. That's an easy one for most people to wrap their heads around, because the opposite of justice is injustice, and that's not merciful. The opposite of mercy is to be unmerciful, and there's nothing just about that. But how can you be perfectly just and perfectly merciful at the same time? Well, I think ultimately only God can do that. But do you see how they tug against each other? If you listen to two things, if you find yourself saying, well, is it this or is it that? When the answer is yes, then you're dealing with a contrary. And life is full of these contraries. So justice and mercy, community and individuality. Is it good to sacrifice for the community? Absolutely. But if you do that at the expense of yourself, and to your earlier point, Todd, you're talking about basically putting on your own oxygen mask. If you fail to do that, then you die an early death and you're no good to anybody. You can't contribute to the community anymore. But so it is good to take care of yourself, but if you do that to the exclusion of everything else and you never say yes, you never make a sacrifice for the good of others, well, then you're just a selfish, egotistical narcissist. And nobody likes that, and you're not going to go very far. So is it important to give to the community? Yes. Is it important to take care of yourself? Yes. But they tug against each other all the time. There's love and law. There's truth and tolerance. There's men and women. Men and women aren't opposites. They're contraries. They're different. They tug against each other. But we need both to be centered. We absolutely need both. And I think when we learn to see those contraries in life, first of all, we recognize that they are all around us. And second of all, we recognize that when we're getting too extreme on one side, that's when we need to pull back toward the opposite side. That's when we need to recognize the contrary that has to be coupled with it, or else we are imbalanced. So, I mean, we could go off in the weeds even in the political spectrum. And we could talk about the value of the ideas that both political parties in the United States have. Is there value on both sides and their ideologies and their mindset? Absolutely there is. That's why half the people go one way and half the people go another way. But it's only when we sit with all of those ideas and say, how are we going to wrestle with all this stuff at once that we actually get somewhere? So part of what you were describing earlier is this contrary to prove between flexibility and rigidity. Is it important to have some definites in life, some things that we do without fail every single day? Yes. Is it important to learn to be flexible, to roll with unpredictability, and to deal with uncertainty? Absolutely. But too much flexibility and not enough rigidity, and we become imbalanced and we don't accomplish things that we need to. Too much rigidity without enough flexibility, and most people probably aren't going to want to be around us because we're so routine that the minute something goes wrong, we fall apart and we're a mess. So learning to sit with those things makes a huge difference. And if I had seen that earlier in life, I think I would have found tremendous peace earlier in my life. I think I would have been more open to anything that people wanted to share. I don't feel threatened by someone who has a different view than I do. I actually find myself really interested, and I just want to lean in and learn more because there's always something on the other side of what I'm thinking that I haven't seen yet. And I think that really is a key for all of us to find greater balance in our lives.
Yeah, and it all comes down to balance. I have a good friend that's in my thinking group, and he often says it's like a dial, right? You just need to tune in the dials a little bit, right? If you're a little bit too much one way or too much another way. It's tricky and it takes time to be able to manage that. But I think to your point, just being cognizant of the fact that there are these two different things and we need both and we need to dial them in and just be balanced. No, I absolutely love that. And this leads into our next kind of section that I wanted to talk about, Eric. You talk a lot about being a lifelong learner, which that's what this show is all about cultivating a growth mindset. We say, if you're not learning, you're not leading, and you're not living. Like, that's just it for me. And, we talked about that continuum, that mindset continuum that I created, and trying to find the correlation between why we dip below the line in a fixed mindset and why we come above the line into a growth mindset. How do we get to a place of lifelong learning and stay there? And I think it comes back to curiosity. And you and I had a long discussion, about curiosity, and not just the novel aspect, but epistemic, right? The desire for knowledge, the deep learning. And you just said it, that people are going to have other thoughts and ideas. And yeah, you can be in a fixed mindset, close down and walk away, or you could lean in and just be open, change your lens, have some empathy, and not make any assumptions and not react, and just listen, pause, and then reflect. And maybe you respond, maybe you don't, but that all takes time. That's the Viktor Frankl, having the space to choose your response. But we got to have the space. And I think people just move so quickly and they make assumptions and they react. If we all just slow down, and that's the meditation, that's doing the mental fitness work, that's being in tune with your emotions, your EQ, your PQ, then we can start to just be more cognizant. But I love that I have a deep respect for people who are lifelong learners, and I'm claim to be one myself. I'm very interested in lots of different things. I always have been. And though I've fallen down below the line in a fixed mindset over the years, and I believe many of us do, we have seasons in life. The thing is, we can always shoot back up. And that's the hope piece, right? That we can change our trajectory, because once we're in a growth mindset, man, that is where the gold's at. Life is so beautiful when you're in a growth mindset. And as we talk about brain health, cognitive health, I mean, that's definitely where it's at. We're constantly pushing ourselves. We're being extremely curious, igniting our spark every single day to just learn a little something new, something that we haven't experienced before. So how do you stay in a curious mindset, Eric? And how do you continue on as a lifelong learner? Do you have any tips or tactics that you employ every day or weekly?
Yeah, it's a good question. And on one level, it's a little bit hard to answer because some of it is just how I'm wired. honestly, from the time I was a little kid, I would go to school and I was curious about everything. I just wanted to know how everything worked. And then I would come home and probably drive my mother bonkers because I would regurgitate everything that I had learned. Mom, I learned about this, and guess what this? And to her eternal credit, she would just listen and let me share because she had the wisdom to recognize that when I was reteaching it to her, that was solidifying it. That was
Yeah.
me learning. And she let me do that, even though she probably had to bite her tongue sometimes. So I've tried to do that for my own children. But to put a finer point on what I do, number one, I really work hard to ask better questions, both of myself and of other people. And I'm constantly thinking about, well, what questions am I asking? And how could I ask a more effective question so that I could see something that I wouldn't otherwise see? And I pay attention when other people ask really good questions. Sometimes I even write them down. And I keep a journal of things that I'm learning because we can't possibly keep track of all of that. And every successful person that I know keeps a journal and just writes down the little nuggets that they're picking up along the way in life. That's another thing I wish that I had started doing when I was younger. It's
Yeah.
only been about
Same.
the last 10 years that I've really been good about carrying around a journal and just collecting the nuggets along the way.
Mhm.
I think also just intentionally reading broadly and listening broadly. I've taught music history classes for 25 years now. And one of the reasons that I still do that, aside from the fact that I love music, it's been an important part of my life, is that it keeps me engaged in a field that's completely different from brain health. And it allows me to see things that I otherwise wouldn't see. For example, yesterday I gave a lecture to a group of about 50 people about some really early English music. And we were talking about Henry Purcell, who lived 36 years back in the 1600s, and people are still performing his music today. And part of why he made such a difference is that he came on the scene right in the English Reformation, where we shifted from Oliver Cromwell and the Puritans that basically outlawed anything that would have been fun or enjoyable like music. And the monarchy came back into power, and people were hungry for music everywhere. They wanted music at church. They wanted music in the court. They wanted music on stage with plays. And they were kind of making up for lost time. And so here's this guy that came in and really leveraged an economic opportunity based on a cultural shift. And I found myself yesterday thinking, man, we are in the midst of such cultural shifts. There's so many opportunities. When the pendulum swings, that's when opportunity is there. And what am I doing to see the current opportunities that no one else is seeing? What am I doing to anticipate where things might be shifting to? And I never would have been in that space if I wasn't reading about and thinking about some dude from the 1600s that most people don't even know about anymore, but enough know about that his music still gets performed on a regular basis. I think that's the key to finding creative new solutions. You go to places that you don't normally go to, and it unlocks things for you. And every successful person that I know that I've really studied is pretty broad in what they read, and that fuels creativity.
Mm. Yeah, I've heard that several times. And actually, a lot of the guests that I have on the show, in particular authors, are well read, broad terms. And I am not. And it's been something on my list that I want to look into. I'm very much a nonfiction person. And if it's not going to help me in my speaking or in my business, if it's not a business book or something on the brain or neuroscience or coaching, I don't pick it up. So it's interesting. It's something that I want to explore, but I do have other outlets. I go to the park. So for me, nature is my place to really kind of unwind and think about things in a different way. So
Mhm.
I like the calmness. I like the peace and quiet without the distractions, without the noise. But that's
Yeah.
a really great point, is to again, it's that discomfort, right? Going outside, trying your other hand. I just love that visual, right? I just want to use my left hand because it's my non-dominant hand.
So Todd, are you cool if I put on my coach's hat for just a minute and nudge you just a little bit?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
So you talked about how you mostly read nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally understand that. On the surface, it seems like, well, that's where all the practical stuff is. That's what's going to affect your business and your life. And there's a strong case to be made for that. But when you think about books that have changed the world, it's actually a relatively short list of books. Think about things like Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. It contributed to the start of the Civil War. It was changing minds. What are the things that you're trying to do in your business? Well, you're trying to influence people. You're trying to change minds. You're trying to get people to move in a certain direction. You're trying to get better at communicating with people. When you look at something like Dostoevsky's works, like Crime and Punishment, my goodness, if you haven't read that and you haven't dug into the way that those characters are developed, and what they say and how they handle life. And if you haven't sat back and considered, wait a minute, Dostoevsky had to know so much about so many different types of people to be able to write them in such a compelling way, then all of a sudden fiction isn't fiction. Fiction is someone's mind that had to dump all these ideas out on paper in a compelling way. And fiction, when it's done really well, and we're talking the books that have changed the world, when it's that level of fiction, you are talking about people who understand other humans at an incredibly deep level. And if you want to know better how to interact with other people, you can get acquainted with a lot of individuals through reading fiction that you never otherwise would have the time or the capacity to get to know at such a deep level. You can think differently based on what you're reading there. And it had to come from someone. So when I'm reading fiction, I'm constantly thinking about, wow, what does this author know? And what have they experienced that leads them to be able to write in such a compelling way? So here's an interesting thing that I did many years ago. I was working at an assisted living community that was about 45 minutes away from where I lived. So I had quite a bit of time commuting every day. And there was a whole list of books that I never read in any of my schooling that were among the most significant books ever written by anybody. And they were all fiction books. So we're talking mostly classic literature. And I just took out that list and I started going down the list, and I'd check out audiobooks from the library and I listened to them on my commute. And over the course of a few years, it's crazy how many books I got through listening in my car every day for 90 minutes a day. And it changed me. I learned so much about myself, about life, about business, about how to show up with other people, about how to interact by reading the books that have influenced millions of people and are still talked about today. So it's really easy and convenient to go pick up the latest nonfiction hardback or paperback that's just come out and to try to constantly be keeping up with that. But most of those books are never going to be remembered. But if you focus in on the few books that have actually changed the world and have influenced how centuries of people have been thinking, that's a different level experience. And I just invite you to try it. See what happens.
You got me. You're a good coach. You inspired me enough. Yes. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have a commute. So it's the time thing, right? So if I'm going to spend an hour before going to bed, am I going to read something? But I see your point. It's a very interesting point you made.
Here's the tip though. I don't have a commute, but I listen and I try to balance out fiction with nonfiction and all that. But I listen to books when I'm out running or when I'm cycling or in the morning when I'm shaving. I mean, I listened to Bob Berg's interview with you, which was awesome because I've read The Go-Giver and I love. I was like, oh my gosh, Todd, talk to Bob Berg. This is amazing. I listened to that while I was shaving when that episode dropped. So we have time. We're just not using the gold dust of time. We're not as intentional about it as we could be.
The gold dust. I love it. Eric, oh my gosh, this has been an enlightening conversation for sure. We could go on and on for hours. Um, where do we go from here? Uh, I want people to know that there are a number of different things that they can leverage. You put out some really good content. I don't know how you do it, my friend, but you are very intentional. And what I learned from you, I know that it's going to be really good stuff. You're not just putting it out just to put out. It's good quality. So you can go to Eric's website. You can sign up for the Mindful Brain newsletter. I get that. I think that's a weekly.
Mhm. It is.
And then he has the Caregiver Minute, which is a daily video. And I love those. And those are great. They're what, 5 minutes, depending on the topic and how you're feeling that day. But 2 great pieces of content. And then Eric, also tell us just real quickly as we wrap up here, because I didn't give you enough time or really any time to talk about the business, this really incredible business. And I am interested in going through your protocol next year because I want to learn more. I want to be the best that I can be. I want my brain to operate at its highest level. And I know there are some components that are missing. So what can we do? Where can we learn more? And just give us a very quick high level about the enhanced protocol that you have there.
Yeah, the enhanced protocol is something that you can understand in 4 words: measure, learn, apply, adjust. Basically, it's a very organized process for measuring 100 or so factors that affect how your brain is performing, mostly in a blood test and a cognitive test. We gather health history. And then we learn and help you learn what the very best research out there has to say about those things and what you can do to positively influence them. And then we help you apply what you've learned, and we coach you through all of that. And then we remeasure and make adjustments so that we can objectively say, yeah, you're getting better. Your energy's improving. Your cognitive skills are really going up pretty dramatically. And it's interesting to see what happens when we do that work with people. One of our members recently posted a whole LinkedIn article about his journey from a cognitive score in the 68th percentile to getting it up to the 99th percentile and what that's done for his life. And he's in his 40s. He's a high-level executive commercial insurance broker. He leads a practice out of New York City. And it's been awesome to see that kind of a change. So if people want to learn more about that, just go to amindforallseasons.com/start, and you can learn more about the enhanced protocol and what it takes to go through that. And it's really relatively inexpensive. It costs a lot less than 1 month in a memory care community, and it'll prevent you from having to go there. So
excellent.
Yeah, love to share that with people.
And we'll have all this in the show notes as well. So, well, Eric, this has been awesome, my friend. Thank you so much. I'm grateful that you and I got connected and we've been able to spend some time together. I hope our audience got a couple of nuggets out of this. I know I did. And that's all I ask for, right? If I'm going to spend some time, I just want to get a couple of nuggets that I can take away and really push me to think a little bit differently. And hopefully that's what we did here today. So I appreciate all that you're doing and what you're doing for the community, the dementia community, Alzheimer's. My mom's going through it. Who knows what I can learn from that and how I can apply that and help her as well. So you're doing meaningful work, my friend, and it's important. So thank you so much.
Well, my pleasure. It's great to be with you, Todd.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Bolt Podcast. I appreciate you spending some time with us today, and it's been a pleasure being part of your journey toward growth, transformation, and leadership. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and leave a review. It truly helps us reach more people like you. Interested in taking your leadership to the next level? Visit toddbirch.com to learn more about my keynote speaking, corporate training programs, and my positive intelligence coaching. Look, I'm here to help you build the mental resilience and leadership skills that drive lasting change. And remember, progress comes from small, consistent steps. Keep moving forward, my friends. And before we wrap, a quick reminder that the information shared on the Bolt Podcast, along with anything from toddbirch.com or all my social media channels, is for informational and educational purposes only. We all need support, and if you're seeking meaningful guidance, one of the best things you can do is talk to a licensed professional, whether that's a physician, therapist, or coach. Hey guys, take care of yourself, stay kind to your mind, and remember, help is always available when you need it. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.